Hey, Senda.
Hey, Phil.
Do you want to continue our conversation about game design?
Heck yeah, I do. We failed to fit that into a single episode.
Yeah, we're going to need to do a little more work, so let's get to it. Cue music. And welcome to another fine episode of Panda's Talking Games. I am your host, Phil.
And I am your other host, Senda. And on tonight's episode, we are going to wrap up the topic that we started last time that we thought was one topic, or like one show's worth of topic, and then it turned out that we kind of just kept rambling about it, and so it became 2 shows worth of topics. So the topic was thoughts on game design, and as just a quick, brief refresher, what we talked about last week, so it's been a little while since you've heard it, we talked about having an idea, we talked about development, and we talked about playtesting, which brings us to today.
Yeah, so going back to that original list of things to talk about, the next one in our list is the feedback.
Feedback.
Now, when we talked about playtesting, there's basically 2 types of information that you get from a playtest. So the first one is your own analysis of how the game's going. So when I'm designing a game and I'm playtesting it, I am watching it to see if it's doing the things I expect it to do. Did that move kind of go the way I think it was going to? Did the rules engage in a particular situation that I was expecting it to occur? If they did engage, did they engage the way I wanted them to? Those kinds of things.
Did they drive the narrative into the style of narrative that you were expecting them to? That's a big one with like Powered by the Apocalypse, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that kind of stuff.
And that's internal collection, right? That's your own personal observations of what's going on in the game. And that's great. There's a lot of useful data in there, but that's only like 1/2 of the data that you can get from a playtest, right? So the other part, which brings us to this point in the checklist, is feedback from the people who are playtesting it.
Yay!
And feedback is when the other people who are playing the game tell you what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what worked for them, what did not work for them, those kinds of things. And this can be... So this is tricky because, one, all critique hurts on some level.
It does. It just does.
Now, over time, you get used to it. Like you don't internalize it and take it in, like you don't take it as an attack. If you have ever had a background where you have had to been critiqued frequently, so I was a grad student in the sciences, and as a grad student, critiquing your scientific designs and things like that is a sport.
Yeah, I don't think I had it quite as harsh as that, but I was in theater, so everything is about how it's perceived by other people, which means that every design class that you take, every acting class that you take, I didn't take that many acting classes because I'm a tech person, but every design class that you take is about presenting what you did, what you were trying to accomplish, and then everybody critiquing it, the professor and everybody, right? So that's a lot of critiquing.
Yeah, and so if you have that background, then the feedback part is not quite as sharp. I mean, another background I will say is if you have ever done any software design and had testers like QA and stuff like that come back, that is another form of critique.
It absolutely is. But the one other thing I will add to that is but you can get out of practice, right? At hearing critique and not personalizing it.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess what I'm saying is if you've had that kind of background, then you kind of know what's coming next. If you have not ever had that kind of background, then we're going to try to give you some tips because when people start telling you stuff, your instincts are going to be to take it personally.
Yeah. And to get defensive.
To get defensive about it and to kind of wall off. You know, and that's not going to be useful for good feedback, because here's the thing. When you are designing a game, you are hopelessly deep inside the game.
Yeah.
And you are the least objective person about the functioning of the game. Even if I'll give an example. Like if a player says like, oh, well, you know, in that scene, like I felt like that scene really dragged and it fell flat. And in my head, I'm like, yeah, I get what you're saying. But see, what didn't happen was there are these mechanics that happen later that are going to make that really awesome.
Yeah.
But here's the important part. If the player thinks it dragged, then it dragged. Yes, yeah. Exactly. Right? So it doesn't matter that I have some downstream mechanism. What's important is when I hear that feedback from the player, I need to realize that probably that mechanism is too far downstream and I need to pull it closer. Okay, that's a hypothetical example. But the point being is players are going to give you feedback. Now, here's the other side of this coin. The ability to give feedback is also a skill.
Yes, absolutely. A practiced skill. Yeah.
It is a practice skill. So if you go to a place like Metatopia and you are playtesting your game with other designers or people who playtest games frequently at Metatopia, the type of feedback that you get often is very non-threatening. It is very constructive. And it tends to be fairly focused, as in those people who are playtesting your game can kind of tell you exactly where something didn't click and even offer potential solutions why. I will say that often as a playtester, you should not offer an explanation for how to fix things unless asked.
Yeah.
As a playtester, you should just offer observation.
Yeah, unless asked, I would definitely.
If you're asked, then you should provide like solutions, but your best feedback is just to give stuff. So that's the experience side. If you just go and play this with your friends or take it to a game store and play it, the feedback that you could get could be all over the place. And in those cases, you need to be even more thick-skinned about it, because somebody might be like, oh, that combat sucked.
Yeah. Because they don't know how to say it, you know, they don't know how to pinpoint what didn't make it fun for them, right?
Exactly. Right? So they just blurt out like it sucks, and you're just like, ouch. You, like how dare you say that about my baby? Like I've sweated blood for, right?
Do you know how many hours I've spent in Excel perfecting this character sheet?
Right. But you might have play tested that at like something like Metatopia or with other designers, and people could be like, hey, I see what you're going for with the combat, but let me tell you, it felt really mathy. And the dice mechanic was like, it was really like, it took a while to kind of build a pool and roll it. And I felt like it just kind of like everything kind of dragged. That is a completely different quality of feedback.
Yeah. Because it gives you a very specific issue to address.
Yes.
Which is much more like, hey, the combat was draggy because there was a bunch of rules latency in here. So like, how could you tighten this up to make it click along a little faster?
Yes. Yeah.
Which is very different than
where
it sucked.
Yeah, like it, because you can't do anything with it sucked.
No, it's useless.
You can't dismiss it either.
Yeah.
Right? So if somebody tells you it sucked, you need to go digging, right? So you can't be defensive about it. You actually have to be like, oh, I'm sorry you didn't enjoy it. Can we maybe elaborate on why you didn't enjoy it, right? Did you think that it wasn't exciting, or did you think it was too slow, or, too fast? Like, and then you can kind of tease that out. But in order to be able to do that, you have to be open.
Yep.
You can't close off.
Yeah.
Right? So you have to be open. So the thing with feedback is critique is hard. It's not fun, and it is a crapshoot. on what you're going to get. So sometimes you're going to get great critique and you're going to jot a few notes and be like, awesome, I'm going to take that back with me and I'll start working on it. And other times you're going to have to kind of sit and tease it out and figure out, like, you may not even know how to solve the problem yet. You may just know that you have a problem.
Yeah.
For instance, and so here's the thing. It can happen at any point during the playtest. And players find all sorts of things that you either have a blind spot towards or things that you like hadn't gotten around to thinking about or testing. It's the reason why playtesting with people is fantastic, right? Because it is critique and feedback outside of the box. And I'll give you an example from Hydro Hackers.
Yes.
So Hydro Hackers, we took it to Metatopia. Mm-hmm. And we were having the high test. So for people, if you haven't listened to our Metatopia episodes, the high test is a play test with only other designers.
Yep.
Right. So it is design. The play test is where you get like real quality feedback. And we had a rather good play test. Like we did an abbreviated session. Everybody had a good time. Mm-hmm. And we got to the end. Mm-hmm. And one of the designers at the table, she was like, I have one comment. I was playing the hydrologist and the main stat for their main move is mind, right? Well, that's your mental acuity. And she was like, there are no basic moves that use mind.
No basic moves. There are, in fact, I'm not even sure there were any other moves that used mind.
Right. And I was like, really? So like I not that I didn't believe her, but I was like, huh. You would have thought I would have, like, you would have thought by now we would have found that. And sure enough, like, we took out the basic move sheet and she was absolutely right.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, thank you very much. That is a glaring hole in the design. And obviously it was delivered very well, but also was very open to it, right? And this was a late test for us. I had played Hydro Hackers a whole bunch of times.
Oh boy, and me
was
too.
Very
by then.
Right.
Yes.
And yeah, exactly. Like, I had run it a bunch of times. You had played it a bunch of times. You had even run it a couple times by this point. Yes.
Oh yeah, I don't remember the order in which life happened.
Yes, because Origins
comes
ran.
before. You're right. Origins comes before Metatopia.
Yeah, so you had run it, I had run it. Right. Neither one of us ever found this.
Yeah.
Right. And it came in, and here's the thing: it's late in the game, like it's late in design, and we had to go back and like find places for mind and change a few moves to use mind late in the design process. And I will tell you, if you've never designed a game before, when you are late in the design process,
it's harder.
Going back and making like base level changes like that, mm-hmm. like things that are like in the fundamentals of the game, it's not the funnest thing to do. But this woman was absolutely right. It was a glaring mistake. So we went back and addressed it.
Yeah, and it unfortunately meant that as that particular playbook, you would put all of your stat into the special skill that you got, and it meant that you were terrible at doing anything else in the entire game.
You were mediocre at a couple things and then terrible.
Yeah, you literally never rolled anything else because somebody else could always do it better. Right.
And that happened one other time earlier in playtesting when somebody who had the neighborhood watch was like, I'm basically just a stick.
Yeah.
And I have no social skills. And then we were like,
we can fix this.
Let's go fix that too. And, so it's really important to get that feedback. And so the takeaways of this are, and I'm going to do this on two sides.
Okay.
When you are the designer, you need to be open, right? You need to soak up, and I have a caveat to this, so I'm going to say all this and put an asterisk in it right now.
Sure.
You need to be open to hearing what people say about the design, and just listen. Don't explain it away. Don't try to defend it. Just listen, and then later, when no one else is around, sort through the comments, right? Like the "it sucks" isn't going to be helpful, so hopefully you got some more stuff from that. This dice mechanic is clunky to put together. That's a thing you got to look at. And then the last thing, and this is the asterisk part of it, sometimes you get feedback that you don't have to follow. You never have to follow any feedback, but sometimes you get feedback where somebody thinks something is a bug when you designed it to be a feature.
Yes.
And it may just be that this person wasn't a good fit for your game. Like in real life, they would never buy this game.
Right.
So
and
they wind up saying
that's
something
okay.
like this combat is too mathy, but like your whole design for the game was to make combat mathy.
Yeah. That
right.
was
So they're
purpose.
like, oh, it was too mathy. And you're like,
Good?
yeah, that's what I was setting out to do.
Right.
So sometimes now this is the hard part, right? Because sometimes you don't, sometimes you take that feedback and you appreciate that you got it, and then you like put it in a box and don't do anything with it. What you have to learn to do is to be objective enough not to just take every piece of advice and stuff
Put it
in
in the
that
box and do nothing with it.
Right.
Yes.
You have to be open to hearing all of that, but sometimes recognize that there are cases where you're just like, well, actually.
Really? Really?
You never say that to
Really?
anyone. You say that later when you're home,
You say
right?
it quietly in your own head.
Like, to yourself.
Keep your well actuallys to yourself.
Yeah. So there were a
That's
couple
the
times.
inside voice.
Right. There were a couple times, I think, in I can't remember if it was Turning Point or if it was in Hydra Hackers, where somebody gave us a piece of advice, a piece of feedback, and we sat later and talked about it, and then we were like, that piece of advice would fundamentally violate the whole design of the game. I think
purpose.
It was Turning Point.
I think it was Turning Point because
Right.
it was a I don't remember what it was specifically.
I know what it was.
What was it?
The person didn't like that the choices in the flashback scenes determined the choice at the end.
Oh, well, yeah.
They were like,
I mean,
well, I want to make the choice at the end, and I was like,
that fundamentally defeats the entire purpose of the game that we were designing. Yes.
right. The whole premise of Turning Point is that your past decisions influence your
Yes.
the big decision you have to make in the game. So that was a case where it was like this person had feedback and we heard it, but then we're also like, and we're not doing a thing with this because
That's a different game.
Yeah, you're talking about a whole other game, and that's not the game we're writing.
Right. And
it was,
and to be clear, not the game that we were interested in writing. So like that's
Correct.
part of it, because sometimes somebody will say something like that and you go, oh my God, that would be way better. And you could shift your entire base design. Like there's nothing that says you can't. Right. But
You
like
absolutely can.
in this particular case, the thing that was particularly interesting to us was the premise. Specifically the premise about how our past experiences influence how we make decisions in the future. So disconnecting our flashbacks from the final decision completely defeated the actual mechanic that we were specifically writing.
So much so.
Yeah.
So much so that as we were eating lunch, we were like, no, we're not doing that.
No.
And in fact, now that I remember everything, I also remember who the designer was who told us that. Who is a good friend and not a small designer by any means. Mm-mm. I'll remind you later.
Okay.
Anyway.
It's good that I have a poor memory for this sort of thing.
That's fine. The last thing I'll say about the feedback before we move on, again, is that if you are providing feedback as a playtester sometime in the future, only limit yourself to identifying what the problem is. Don't offer up the solution. One, you're never going to completely understand how somebody else's game works or what touches what or what bumps into what. So your solution, may easily not work. So just if it's clunky, say it's if it's clunky, say it's clunky. If it's mathy, say it's mathy. But don't be like, if you got rid of three of these variables and only had this and this and that, you don't understand how the rest of the game's put together.
Yeah.
So only offer your observations. Offer them without judgment.
Yeah.
It does not suck. That is not helpful. Explain if it did suck. Don't say so. Just say what didn't work for you.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think so. I don't actually remember, but I feel like when we talked about playtesting with bonus experience, we probably talked about a bunch of this stuff because there is a whole sort of middle thing about playtesting and feedback, right? In which it also ends up being your responsibility as both the game designer and the person running the game, probably. Not in all cases, but the game designer who's seeing this playtest happen, to set up a situation in which you can get the kind and style of critique that you want. And you can control that to some extent. So I'll just throw a couple of things out really quickly, and then I think we should jump to the next thing.
Absolutely.
So there's a couple of ones that I see frequently and, use myself. Roses and thorns is the one that I usually default to, which is,
Sure.
A rose is something good and a thorn is something that could be improved, right? Stars and wishes is another one that is the same kind of idea, but it's a little bit less negative because wishes are just like what you want to see next time. I usually see that more in terms of like a long running campaign or like running a game, like something like that. But you could also do that.
Yeah, and then I'll say just one last one to tack onto that is you can have a very specific playtest. Right?
Oh yeah,
so
you can
say
it.
You can be like, hey, this playtest is only regarding ranged combat.
Yes. Yep.
Like, I don't have hand-to-hand combat worked out yet. This playtest is only regarding ranged combat today.
Right.
And then that's all you want to hear critique on.
Yep.
And sometimes you can even do a general playtest and be like, hey, we've really playtested, like this really well. Today's playtest, I would really like to just hear about skill resolution.
Mm-hmm.
And just, you can say that. You're allowed to say that up front.
Yeah.
And you can funnel that feedback that you get.
Yep. You can be more specific. Anyway, yes,
okay.
I wanted to just mention that in brief.
No, excellent point. Excellent point. Okay, let's move on to the alpha, the beta, and the ashcan.
It sounds like the title of a book. Tinker, Soldier, Sailor, Spy.
Alpha, beta, ashcan. So these words get tossed around. There's no hard definition for any of these three words.
No.
So we're going to give you our personal definition of what we think they are.
Or like how we tend to work with them.
Correct.
In terms of our own work.
Yes.
Because that's all we can really say.
You just, here's the salt. Just take some while we explain this. Like, have a grain or two while we explain this. Our mileage will vary. Don't quote us on this. Don't add us on Twitter about this because this is just the terminology, the way we operate with it.
Yes.
Okay. So alpha rules to me are the following. I have written some shit down. I don't necessarily think this all works, nor do I think it's complete, nor do I think this is what it's finally going to look like. I may change any or all of this. But here it is.
Yeah, I think to me, if I can tack on to that, because that sounds very similar, to me, the moment that it achieves alpha status from like draft, like me, is I don't think this is necessarily all going to work. I don't know how it's going to happen at the table, blah, 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 right? But I have something playable and I won't know till I try it.
Yes. And I might even be able to share it with you in a document, but also
maybe not.
I have not edited this. Yeah. It's not complete. If you know me, if you've ever written anything with me, you will find the word in capital stuff.
Yeah, stuff.
In a place, which is a tag to tell me to go back and write more things.
A lot.
Yes.
It used to be Senda's place in the show notes.
Yes.
Stuff. And then I wouldn't put anything in there. And then you would have all planned out things and I would just say things. Stuff.
So stuff came about because when I was learning to write and I was starting to write rules and blog articles and things like that, I would get to a point where I would be like, this paragraph seems too short. I don't know what else to write. And I'm getting stuck. So I would write the word in caps stuff, and then I would start writing the next paragraph and keep going. And then later, because it's all in caps, if I don't find it myself, the editors will find it because they'll find the giant word stuff and they'll ask me why it's there. But here's what I learned. 9 times out of 10, maybe like 7 times out of 10, when I go back to the word stuff and reread the paragraph's fine. And I just take the word out and keep going.
Yeah.
Only like 30% of the time I reread the paragraph and then I'm like, probably needs a sentence
probably
or two
needs
more.
some stuff.
Yeah. It almost never needs stuff, but I put it in there because I think that's what, because my brain is hung up on it. Like, it doesn't want to write the next part, but also it doesn't know what to write in this part. And I'm like, look, brain, we got to get moving. Like, we can always come back and fix these things. Okay, so that's where stuff comes from. All right.
Sure.
So alpha means like it's somewhat codified. It needs a whole lot of testing. And it's somewhat shareable, but like, I'll be honest, I personally don't share out my alphas with anyone. Like, and when I say with anyone, I mean not counting Senda because we designed together.
Yeah, that's different.
And the alpha is our alpha. And when I say mine, it's just usually I'm the one who types it.
Yeah. You have been
like
for
we
the
both
last...
design it, but usually my job is to write it into a Google
down,
Doc.
Will you please?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we talk through all these things and we play through them. And then when it's time to like, hey, we should have a Google Doc with this, it's like my job to go sit and write it. And that is okay. In the division of labor.
It's because you have historically had specific set aside time for the working on of the things. I have now shed a podcast.
Yeah. Well, now we'll just write it together.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see what happens when we all have...
So,
anyway, this is beside the point.
That's okay. So beta. Okay, so beta means it's been play tested. It is somewhat stable. Mm-hmm. It is mostly done, but there may be a few sections that are a little thin, or there may be a couple things changing before we get to the final.
Yeah.
But it's pretty playable.
Yeah. It's something that I could hand to someone else and say, can you play this and let me know how it goes? Right? And acknowledging things like, I know that there's an issue with, this mechanic right here. So like...
See if you run into it,
run into that or whatever, right?
Or maybe there's no advancement section.
Right.
And there's just the word stuff. Right? Like, because I'm not ready to write the advancement section yet because I need combat to work.
Yeah. Right.
And I feel good about combat now, but I haven't done anything else.
Right.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah, and I think you hit on the important part, at least for us, is a beta is something I will hand not to strangers.
Yeah, not to strangers.
And I will not charge any money for a beta.
No, I won't charge money for it.
But I would like if Schmitty was like, hey, I would like to take, like when Ditch Lilies reaches beta, because Ditch Lilies is an alpha.
It's an alpha. It's definitely an alpha. Yeah.
Right. Ditch Lilies is an alpha. But if it got to the point where it was in beta and we were comfortable with it, and Schmitty was like, hey, I have some friends and I would like to play the Ditch Lily game with them, I would be comfortable because Schmitty's in our very close circle of friends where I would be like, okay, I'm going to give you the beta, run it, and tell me how it
feedback
goes.
And we'll put your names in the book because if you give us feedback, then you should be listed as playtesters,
Absolutely. But beta, I think you hit the most important difference between alpha and beta. Beta is the thing that I would not be ashamed to give someone, but also understand you're getting a Word doc.
Yeah, I've not
laid this thing out.
There's nothing. It's going to have typos in it. It's going to be,
Right. The editing pass that may have happened is Senda fixed it.
Yes.
Not the editors yet.
Yes.
But Senda fixed it when she was just reading the junk I wrote and was like, ugh.
Take out the commas for God's sake. There's
Just
so
pile them up.
many.
One day I want one of you guys in a manuscript to just, instead of deleting the commas, cut them and paste them into the back of the document.
Oh God, that would take
And we
so
could just
long,
see how
Phil.
many.
That would take so long. You were asking me to
making me
build
sad.
the Great Wall of China with commas. Why would you do
Okay.
that?
The last term is ashcan. I'm going to add a fourth term on here, which is quick start, because we're going to use these because these reach the same state,
Yes.
but they're different.
But they're different, and people use them sometimes. They get flop. Oof. It's a little bit floppy about how the quote industry uses them, right? So these, again, just our definitions.
Ashcan is a very messy term.
It's a very messy term.
It's a very messy term. It's not very well nailed down. I will tell you how we use it. Mm-hmm. And then if you disagree, that's fine. You disagree. But for us, an ashcan is a low-cost publication of rules that are better than beta, but not finished. Mm-hmm. So if you look at Hydro Hackers, the ashcan for Hydro Hackers is on Drive-Thru RPG. It is a book. Mm-hmm. It has a limited amount of artwork. Mm-hmm. It has a set of rules for 80% of the game. Mm-hmm. It is missing the rules for the Hydro Hack.
Mm-hmm. Because those kept getting ripped apart.
Because that was the section that was being developed and redeveloped and redeveloped.
Yeah.
It is completely playable. Mm-hmm. You could play multiple sessions out of it. You could actually have a whole mini campaign out of the ashcan. It is of a quality that I am not embarrassed about for you to see, but it only cost us, I think, $200 in artwork to produce the book. Mm-hmm. Very inexpensive. And it's not very big. It is definitely not done, and the book says like a dozen times in it, it's not done. That is the ashcan, and I'm very happy with it, and it'll exist all the way up until I finish off the full manuscript for Hydro Hackers, and then the ashcan will go away after the Kickstarter to be replaced by the full rules.
Yes.
Okay, that's ashcan. Low cost, low quality publication meant to distribute a rule set greater than beta but less than final.
Yes.
Well, that's not a bad definition. I'm going to have to come back and I'm going to go fish that out of here, like out of the audio one day.
You have to listen to it. Shall I write down?
I'll have to remember we recorded it. That'll be the first part, is I'll be like, man, did we ever talk about ashcans before? Like, okay, anyway.
Rob, save us. Will you remind Phil when you hear this?
Yes. Okay. The quick start is different. The quick start is a stripped down version of the game that is also an incomplete rule set, also greater than beta, less than full rules. But it has a specific purpose, which is to teach you how to play the game so that you can experience it.
Yes. And I would say the thing that to me is a little bit different than an ashcan is that a quick start is probably pretty finished. It just doesn't have everything in it. So it's incomplete versus unfinished. And
I think I can explain this best by contrasting Turning Point, which is a quick start, and it's unavailable on Drive-Thru, to Hydro Hackers.
Yes.
So in Hydro Hackers, the Hydro Hackers ashcan reads like a small rule book. It has an introduction, a background, character generation, moves, and a GM section. Mm-hmm. Right? Do with it as you do as a GM, like
game.
Make a game up.
Go do game. Mm-hmm.
The Turning Point Quick Start is actually a script that is formatted so that if you pick it up and start reading it to a group of people, it will teach you how to play Turning Point as it helps you set up a game of Turning Point.
Yes.
A dilemma, as it's known.
Yes.
As it sets up a dilemma, it actually goes through a whole safety section. Mm-hmm. It creates character. It creates the setting for the dilemma. It leads you into the first scene, and then you are playing the game. And its entire purpose is for you to take it to the table and read it like a script to get everyone playing the game.
Yeah, and to be clear, a very distinct difference here is while that quick start will be included in the full published version of the game, that's like an appendix, right? Like that's not.
Oh yeah. That's just gonna be like in the back of the book so that you can just take it and run the game. But
if this is helpful, but like there's a whole book of rules that is not in there.
Right. There's a whole bunch of things that go. It's not that it's missing any rules.
Yeah.
It's missing the deeper explanation of all of them.
Right.
Like there is a whole section in the manuscript for Turning Point, which is a draft that you and I have right now. There's a whole section on tips on how to run a good scene.
Right.
Those are not in the quick start.
No, there's a whole chapter. There's a whole chapter and much more information on safety.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. A much more comprehensive chapter on safety.
Right.
Yes. Which again, there is a safety section in the book, but it assumes that you know how lines and veils work. It explains it briefly, but it doesn't go into the depth in which the manuscript does.
Yeah. The quick start doesn't. Yeah. So
because it is a
quick
start.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to me that's the real difference between those two. The quick start is meant to pick this up and start playing this game right now. Mm-hmm. Like I want to lower the barrier for you to play this game so low that you will just go play this game.
Yes.
And the ashcan is, hey, I've got a game. It's not quite done, but I kind of want to put it out into the world right now.
Yep.
In its not perfect state.
Mm-hmm. The beta 0.5.
Yes. More like final 0.05, right? Like, yeah. Something like that.
Yeah.
Again, greater than beta, less than final.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's the difference. And again, for $5, $7, $8, for $10, you can see the difference between those two by going to drive-thru and go buy the ashcan for Hydro Hackers, go buy the quick start for Turning Point and look at the difference between them because they are very different in what they set out to do.
Yeah.
They're both very good.
Yeah.
I'm ringing our bell.
I know.
Ring.
They're great. I'm really proud of the quick start. I'm really proud of Turning Point.
Oh, I
think
love the quick start. In fact, I not only love it, I use it.
I know because I don't remember the rules. Like that's the really funny thing about designing games is then you don't run it for like a while and you've been through so many iterations of some of these rules. You're like, I don't remember which one is the one I'm supposed to be using now.
I also like the moment where when you go back and you read something and you're like, oh, that's fucking brilliant.
That's really good. Did we do that? That was like, really good.
Like, wow, we did a really good job on that. Wow. The one I get when I often like play like Hydro Hackers and I haven't played it in a while is I'll forget a rule and somebody will say something. I'm like, oh, seriously, who designed this game? Like, jeez. And there is that thing where when you have designed a game over and over and over, your memory of how it works is skewed by like the iterations of
which version of which rule are you going with, and do you remember which is the one you're supposed to be using right now? And
yeah, like there are a couple of those. There's a couple of those moves that got written like 3 or 4 times that to like this day. There's a chance I'm going to remember the correct version of it.
Well, I actually do a really funny thing with Love and Justice, which is I consistently forget that we added a leadership role.
Yes.
It's my game. It doesn't actually need a leader, I don't think, in retrospect. It's fine. I run it without it all the time. Oops. Works great with one.
There we go. Cool. All right. So that's the alpha, the beta, the ashcan. The last thing that comes out of this, which is not something we're going to have time to talk about tonight, but if people are super curious about it, we actually could do a 3rd episode and cover it, which is publication.
Yeah, which is a whole different beast.
So. Yeah. And publication, I will say just briefly, publication is a much more knowable.
Yes. Yeah, it's much more...
And plannable activity.
It's linear.
Yes. Everything else that we've talked about is kind of iterative, where like you work on it, then you play test it, then you get feedback, then you fix it, and blah 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 blah, and eventually
Cycle.
spit out one of eventually you pass through alpha, you pass through beta, and then maybe you put out an ashcan, maybe you put out a quick start, or maybe you just jump to publication. But I will say this: when you go into publication, that is a much more knowable and controllable thing. And it's a very different part, which is why it is really separate from game design, because it is game publication.
Yes.
It's a very different thing.
Yeah.
And it's got its own set of stories and stuff that go heartbreak and stuff that go with it, but it's a very different beast.
Well, and I can go off on a whole rant about PDFs.
Yeah, no,
but
we're
not going to.
When Senda's about to launch into a thing about EPUBs, that is a sign that we have reached the end of the show. And so with that, Senda, tell me about another show on the Misdirected Mark Network so we can close out this episode.
Well, since we mentioned them again, I'm just going to talk about them again. So twice in a row, but whatever. We love them.
There are no rules about
There's no rules. Are you kidding? I make the rules. I run this network. So yeah, on Bonus Experience, you can listen to Ray and Monica, who are two awesome old friends who write and play games, and they are fantastically great and have super good opinions about things that you would probably enjoy.
And some pretty dorky humor.
Yeah. Great.
I mean, I appreciate their dorky humor a lot.
I appreciate their dorky humor too. That's part of why they're here.
Yes. Alrighty. Say, Senda, where can people find us on the internet?
Well, you can find us on Twitter at Pandas Talk Games. You can find us on the Misdirected Mark forums, which is forums.misdirectedmark.com, where if you are into it, you can still join in the Voyager Watch Party. And if you are doing the Voyager Watch Party, you can still join in our lovely journaling side game, which is glorious and also very nice because it's a journaling game, so just engage when you want to and disengage when you don't have the energy. Goodness, where was I in the listing? It's bespoke. You could also drop us an email, panda@misdirectedmark.com, or you could find us on TikTok if you're super brave, and leave us a video. It'll be great. Yeah. Phil, once they find us in one of those places, what can they do with that information?
Yeah, absolutely. Please leave us a topic. We strive to make the show, the content of the show, to be about things that you find important. Our overall goal for this show has always been to help you run better games. And the way we do that is we take topics from you and we share our advice on them. We like talking to each other and hanging out with each other, but we do that all the time.
Yes.
When we do it for you on the mics, we would like you to also get something out of it, which is let us help you make your games more enjoyable for you and for your players. So send us those topics, questions, ideas, thoughts, a topic you want to hear us spin out some ideas on, whatever. We'll do it. It's cool. If you like what we do here elsewhere in the Misdirected Mark Network, please consider backing our Patreon campaign. Go to patreon.com/MMP. Patrons of the show get access to the Bamboo Lounge, the bonus outtakes, the Slack Room for life, which is like it has been my safe haven all through this pandemic. It is my social bubble. Like, how about that? It's my social bubble. And it's great. Like we're now watching all of our friends in the Slack room starting to make appointments for vaccines, and it's very exciting to see everybody.
I'm one vaccine in. We'll talk about that in a minute.
But we appreciate it. Your patronage is what allows us to do all of this. It allows us to host servers and backups and equipment and just all the stuff that makes podcasting possible. So we greatly appreciate all of your support. There's another thing you can do. It helps us get heard it helps us to be heard by other people by shamelessly manipulating the giant mechanisms that work to hold us down. It is the way to rebel against the podcast man, which is Apple.
Wow.
And there's one way to do it. How can they strike a blow at the man and support us pandas?
Well, you too can join the podcast punk revolution and leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or the podcatcher of your choice if you are not an Apple Podcast user. Every new review we get really does stick it to the podcast, man. Am I doing this right? Cool.
Yes.
The giant podcasty corporations. And help us float to the top when other people search for cool game advice stuff. So we super duper 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 appreciate them so very, very much. They make us warm and fuzzy inside. And let's be honest, that's most of the currency that we actually do this for.
Sure is. Good times, good times. Alrighty. Say, Senda. What's it going to take to get Ditch Lilies up to a beta?
Oh, boy.
Show me what you got, 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 show me what you got.
This show is a joint production of She's a Super Geek and Misdirected Mark Productions, the media arm of Encoded Designs.
Show me what you got, 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 show me what you got.
Click, click, click.
I clicked.
Okay. All right. We're not messing around too much. This is the part 2 of this one, and we're going to do it quick so we can have a little bit of
Stuff after.
stuffs. Mm-hmm. All right.
Lounge.
Are you good to go?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to start the timer. Do, do, do,
Do, do, do, do, do, do, do, do, do, do.